Imagine, for a second, holding a VIP contact book, like the ultimate directory of history's most influential, earth-shattering figures.
Oh, right. The absolute titans of human history.
Exactly. You open this really heavy, leather-bound book, and you're just completely in awe, right? Because you see the names printed in gold foil. Moses, David, Jesus, Adam.
The foundational figures of, well, billions of people's spiritual lives.
Right. And you're looking for a way to connect with them,
Yeah.
to access their world-changing wisdom. But as you eagerly flip through the pages, this massive wave of frustration hits you.
Because something's missing.
Everything is missing. Well, every single name is there, perfectly spelled out, perfectly cataloged.
Yeah.
But when you look for their actual phone numbers, like the lines of communication, they are completely missing.
Or maybe you just get a half-formed string of digits, right?
Yeah, exactly. A 555 here, a missing area code there. You hold in your hands the acknowledgement that these incredible people existed, but their actual revolutionary voices have been entirely muted.
Which basically transforms a tool of profound connection into a mere museum piece. I mean, you possess the roster, the prestige of the names, but you are completely locked out of the dialogue that made those names prestigious in the first place.
Exactly. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are unpacking a really highly provocative, complex article. It's titled Sawtu Anbiya, The Voices of the Nabiyun, and that contact book analogy.
That's the core of it.
Yeah, that is the foundational premise we are exploring today. This text makes a staggering claim. It says that 25 of the world's most famous recognized prophets,
Known in the Islamic tradition as the Nabiyun.
right, the Nabiyun,
Yeah.
that they have had their original expansive messages actively erased, reduced, or just permanently silenced in the historical record.
Yeah, the author's thesis is that we've inherited this framework where the presence of these figures is celebrated, sure, but the actual specific architecture of their prophecies has been flattened.
Flattened out.
Right. The contact names are venerated, but the phone numbers, the deep theological mechanics of their original messages, they've been deliberately left blank.
And as we get into this, I want to address you, the listener, directly. Because depending on when you are tuning in, we are approaching the seasons of Eid and Nowruz.
Which is a beautiful time of year.
It is. These are times fundamentally tied to renewal, spring cleaning, and most importantly, the celebration of freedom. And the text we are looking at today argues that true freedom comes from unfiltered knowledge.
Right.
I mean, think about it. This Eid and Nowruz celebrate the freedom that knowledge gives you. Why would they give you the contact names but give you no phone numbers or half-formed ones?
That is the big question.
That's exactly how you get a whole bunch of Nabiyun with no prophecies
Yeah.
or just partial, meaningless utterances. That is the mystery we are decoding today.
But before we open that vault, we really need to set the parameters for how we're approaching this.
That's absolutely. Disclaimer time.
Yes. It is essential we establish our methodology here, because we are wading into comparative religion, theology, and textual criticism.
Deep waters.
Very deep. These subjects touch the absolute bedrock of faith for billions of people across multiple major world religions. And the claims made in Sawtu Anbiya are, well, they're disruptive.
To say the least.
Right, they challenge centuries of established tradition.
Which means our role here is very specific. We are not theologians, and we are absolutely not taking a side here.
No, not at all.
We are not here to endorse the viewpoints of this article, nor are we here to debate the inherent truth of Islam, Christianity, or Judaism. Consider us your impartial tour guides through a very complex architectural blueprint.
Impartial is the key word.
Right. We are going to report, unpack, and thoroughly convey the intriguing and, controversial ideas contained within this source material. We want to show you exactly how the author builds this argument brick by brick so you can analyze the structural integrity of these claims for yourself.
And the very first brick in that argument is the concept of the flattened message. The source text begins by introducing the Nabiyun al-Khamsa wa Ishrun.
The 25 prophets.
Exactly. These are the specific prophetic figures explicitly recognized by name in the Quran.
And it is an incredible roster. I mean, you have figures that span millennia. But the author identifies a systemic pattern in how these 25 distinct lives are portrayed.
A very specific pattern.
Yeah. According to the text, despite their vastly different historical eras, their cultures, the massive crises they faced. Their primary function in the later Quranic narratives is reduced to delivering one single, identical, and highly simplified divine message.
Which the text refers to as the Risala of Tawhid.
Okay, let's unpack those terms so we have a working vocabulary.
Sure. So Risala translates essentially to the message or the specific commission given to a messenger. And Tawhid is the absolute uncompromising center of Islamic theology.
The core of the core.
Right. It is the doctrine of strict, indivisible monotheism. It asserts the complete oneness of God, one singular being, one singular essence, with no partners, divisions, or pluralities whatsoever.
Okay, so to use a musical analogy here, if the entire history of divine revelation is a beautifully complex symphony with soaring violins, deep brass, intricate woodwinds, and overlapping melodies, Tawhid is a single, powerful, recurring drumbeat.
I like that, a drum beat.
Right, and the author isn't arguing that the drumbeat isn't there. It is absolutely foundational. But the claim is that if you filter the entire symphony only through that single drumbeat, you lose the music.
You lose the nuances.
Exactly. The text suggests that reducing these deeply complex historical prophets into mere delivery mechanisms for basic moral guidance and strict monotheism, it obscures the richer, often more terrifying and beautiful realities they actually preach.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it creates a kind of theological monoculture.
Oh, that's a good way to phrase it.
Yeah, because when you examine the older original texts that these prophets supposedly authored or inhabited, you find highly specific instructions regarding divine justice, human depravity, and incredibly complex systems of approaching the divine.
But the standardized narrative just sweeps all of that away.
According to the author, yes, it sweeps it away to maintain the simplicity of the drumbeat.
Okay, let's move from the abstract to the concrete here, because the source material brings up a massive, undeniable historical figure to prove this point. Nabi Musa, Prophet Moses.
A giant in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
Right.
Moses is perhaps the most illustrative case study for the author's premise of the flattened narrative. The text draws our attention to a very specific verse, Quran 28.24.
Okay, what happens there?
Well, in this passage, Moses has fled Egypt. He is exhausted, a fugitive, and he expresses a profound moment of personal humility to God. He says, "My Lord, indeed I am, for whatever good you would send down to me in need."
Wow. I mean, it is objectively a beautiful, deeply human quote.
It really is.
It shows vulnerability. It is a man standing before the universe, admitting he just cannot do it alone. But the source text uses this specific quote as a prime example of the problem, right?
Yes. It contrasts this isolated note of polite humility with what it claims has been methodically, surgically excised from the historical record of Moses within this later tradition.
And it's a long list of missing pieces.
A staggering list.
Yeah.
If you look at the older traditions like the Torah, the Exodus narrative, Moses' message was infinitely more complex than just a plea for provision.
Right.
The text points out the absence of the curse on the snake, which is deeply tied to ancient prophecies. It highlights the omission of the specific, covenantal, and highly personal name of God, Yahweh.
The name itself is missing.
Right. It notes the absence of the full, terrifying exposition of the Ten Commandments on Sinai. But most critically, the absolute cornerstone of the author's argument is the complete erasure of the strict, non-negotiable requirement of blood sacrifice for the atonement of sins.
Okay, wait. I have to jump in here and push back on this because I imagine many people listening are having the exact same thought I had when I read this section.
Go for it.
The source goes out of its way to draw this massive neon line between an apology and a sacrifice. But honestly, looking at it through a modern lens, isn't expressing deep soul-bearing humility and apologizing enough? I mean, if I deeply wrong someone I love and I come to them with absolute humility, strip away my ego and say, I am entirely in need of your mercy, isn't that the highest, most evolved form of seeking forgiveness?
From a human perspective, yes.
Right, so why does the text argue that Moses' expression of humility is a flattened or lesser version of religion? Can't the creator of the universe just wave a hand and say, I forgive you? Why the obsession with blood?
That is the exact friction point between modern sensibilities and ancient theology.
Okay, unpack that.
We tend to view forgiveness today through a very therapeutic lens. We see God as a cosmic parent or a therapist who primarily desires our emotional growth, right? And a sincere apology to mend the relationship.
Sure, that's how most people think of it.
But the source text's counterargument is anchored in the ancient, unyielding concept of absolute divine justice.
The idea that God isn't just a parent, but a judge bound by his own laws.
Exactly that. A perfect judge cannot simply wave a hand and dismiss a crime just because the criminal is genuinely sad about it. I mean, think about how that plays out in human society.
Like in a courtroom.
Right. If someone commits a heinous, destructive crime, say embezzlement that ruins hundreds of lives, or violent assault, and they stand before a judge weeping, expressing total humility, the judge might acknowledge their remorse.
But they still have to go to jail.
Exactly. A just judge cannot say, because you are sorry, the demands of the law are vanished. The scales of justice remain unbalanced. A penalty must be extracted. A debt must be paid.
Because the apology doesn't magically unbreak the window.
Yes.
It doesn't undo the damage inflicted on the fabric of reality.
The author argues that an infinitely holy God requires infinite justice. Sin isn't just a mistake. In this ancient framework, it is a cosmic rebellion that incurs a literal existential debt.
Wow. Okay.
The text claims that the omission of the blood sacrifice narrative hides the actual mechanics of how God deals with humanity.
So Moses wasn't just teaching manners.
Not at all. Through Moses, God didn't just teach the Israelites to be polite and humble. He instituted a massive, visceral, bloody, and daily system of animal sacrifice. He was teaching them, object lesson by object lesson, that the penalty for cosmic rebellion is death. And the only way to survive is if an innocent substitute takes that death in your place.
Which fundamentally alters the entire DNA of the religion.
Completely.
Because if you remove the altar, the blood, and the concept of substitutionary death, and you just replace it with a really sincere apology, you change the religion from a system of desperate rescue to a system of basic manners.
That's a great way to put it.
You are left with a Moses who just asks for good things, rather than a Moses who brokers a terrifying life-or-death covenant of atonement.
And that shift from transactional atonement to simple supplication is the very definition of a flattened message. The stakes are lowered from existential survival to moral self-improvement.
And the author points out that this flattening effect didn't just start with Moses. The text asks us to rewind the clock all the way back to the dawn of humanity, to the very first man, Adam, or Adam.
Right. The analysis of Adam's narrative provides an even starker contrast.
How so?
The source scrutinizes the portrayal of Adam in Course 7.23, which is immediately following the fall, the consumption of the forbidden fruit. In this verse, Adam and his wife say, "Our Lord, we have wronged ourselves, and if you do not forgive us and have mercy upon us, we will surely be among the losers."
Which, again, echoes the Moses dynamic.
Exactly.
It's a profound, eloquent statement of an apology. We messed up, we wronged ourselves, please have mercy. It perfectly fits the drumbeat the author identified. Recognize the one God, admit you failed the moral test, and ask for his singular mercy.
But once more, the source text acts as an auditor. It compares this account against the older Genesis narrative and highlights massive, worldview-altering omissions.
What's missing this time?
The author specifically flags the absence of what biblical theologians call the protevangelion, found in Genesis 3.15.
Okay, let's decode that term for a second. Protevangelion. Proto meaning first, and evangelion meaning gospel or good news. So this is literally the very first seed of the Savior narrative.
That is the precise linguistic breakdown. In the older text, while God is handing out the consequences of the rebellion, he speaks to the serpent and prophesies that the seed of the woman will eventually crush the serpent's head, even while the serpent strikes his heel.
That's intense.
It is. It is a coded, ancient promise that a specific human descendant will arrive to permanently destroy the source of evil through a mutual, fatal struggle.
It's the inception of the entire Messiah concept. It introduces a massive, multi-millennial plotline.
Exactly, but the author points out something even more immediate that gets erased from Adam's story. It's an object lesson that completely encapsulates this apologies versus atonement argument.
Oh, right. We were talking about the clothing, the fig leaves versus the animal skins.
Yes.
This concept absolutely floored me when I was reviewing the source notes. Walk us through the mechanics of this metaphor, because it is just brilliant.
It really is. So, in the Genesis narrative, the immediate psychological consequence of Adam and Eve's rebellion is sudden, overwhelming shame. They realize they are naked.
Right.
Their instinct, the fundamental human instinct, is to cover up their inadequacy. So they gather fig leaves and sew them together to make garments.
Okay.
The text uses this as a profound, enduring metaphor for human religion and human effort. Fig leaves represent our own attempts to cover up our moral failings. It is our apologies, our charitable donations, our PR spin, our attempts to look presentable and acceptable to God based on our own works.
But the fig leaves are inherently flawed. I mean, they dry up, they crumble. They don't actually solve the internal problem. They just mask the external symptom.
Precisely. The narrative explicitly states that God rejects the fig leaves as a sufficient covering. The human attempt at self-atonement fails.
So what does God do?
Instead, God takes an action that must have been incredibly traumatic for the first humans to witness. God himself clothes them in animal skins.
Let's pause on that image for a second. Think about the sensory reality of that moment. Before this, death did not exist in their world. To acquire an animal skin, an innocent animal has to be slaughtered.
Right.
Blood has to be drained.
Yeah.
A life has to be violently ended.
It is the institution of the first sacrifice. It is divine covering through substitutionary death, contrasting sharply with human cover-up through superficial fig leaves.
Wow.
God is demonstrating that the cost of their rebellion isn't a stern talking to, the cost is death. But he is also demonstrating profound grace by allowing a substitute to bear that cost so they can be covered.
That completely blows the doors off the apology verse.
It really changes everything.
The source text argues that by leaving this visceral, shocking object lesson out of the Quranic narrative of Adam, the message is entirely truncated. We are left, in the author's words, with apologies but no atonement.
Yes.
It turns a story about the terrifying cost of sin and the necessity of a bleeding substitute into a story about a guy who ate a bad apple and said he was sorry.
The author suggests that this methodical removal of the sacrificial system from Adam, from Moses, and from the broader narrative is what allows the simplified doctrine of Tawhid to function without friction.
Makes sense of that for me.
Well, if you don't have an insurmountable cosmic debt that requires blood, you don't need a divine savior to pay it. A singular, distant God who just accepts apologies is sufficient.
It's a fascinating look at how textual curation shapes an entire civilization's worldview.
Curation is a great word for it.
And the text points out that this curation doesn't just happen by changing the stories of the speaking prophets. Sometimes the curation happens by putting duct tape over their mouths entirely.
Yes, the non-speaking roles.
Right. The author highlights a bizarre phenomenon regarding several prophets like Idris, Isaac, Dul-Kifl, and Elisha.
Right. The source notes a mix of both biblical and non-biblical figures who are officially granted the title of Nabiyun. They are on the roster.
They're in the contact book.
Exactly. But their actual prophetic voices, the content of what they taught, the specific societal sins they confronted, their unique visions of the divine are completely missing from the text. They are given entirely non-speaking roles.
It reminds me of watching a massive $100 million Hollywood blockbuster.
Okay, how so?
Imagine the studio pays a fortune to cast A-list actors. Denzel Washington, Meryl Streep, Daniel Day-Lewis. You see their names on the poster. But when you watch the movie, they are just standing silently in the background of a diner scene.
Oh, wow.
Right. They don't have a single line of dialogue. Why are they there? They're there for visual prestige. They lend massive historical and cultural weight to the production. But they aren't allowed to actually speak because what they might say could derail the director's carefully controlled plot.
That is a highly accurate reflection of the text's argument. Their names are invoked to validate the overarching narrative, to show that the ancient history supports the current theology.
But letting them speak is dangerous.
Very, because allowing them to actually speak their original complex messages might introduce subplots that distract from or outright contradict the singular drumbeat of Tawhid.
It's a brilliant, if unsettling way to control a narrative. Keep the prestige, lose the liability.
Exactly.
While those silences are intriguing, the source text claims they are just the warm-up.
Right, it gets much bigger.
Yeah. The author leads us to an omission so vast, so intentional, that they refer to it as a vault of silence. We are moving from prophets who had their lines cut to a great king who was given an entire massive book only to have it locked away from the believers.
We must turn our attention to Nabi Dawud, Prophet David.
Okay, let's talk about David.
The text is incredibly emphatic about the unique, elevated status David holds in the Islamic tradition. He is not just a messenger, he is recognized as a great Malik. Yes, a king who wielded massive geopolitical power. And simultaneously, he's a Nabi, a prophet who heard directly from the divine.
So he's got double authority.
Exactly. And most crucially, the Quran explicitly, repeatedly confirms that David was entrusted with a divinely revealed scripture.
The text cites this.
It does. It cites Quran 4.163 and 17.55, which plainly state, "And to David we gave the Zabur."
The Zabur being the Psalms, a collection of 150 ancient, poetic, fiercely emotional chapters.
Yes. So within the internal logic of the tradition, you have Absolute divine confirmation of the prophet, divine validation of his kingship, and explicit divine endorsement of his book. There is no ambiguity about the legitimacy of the Zabur.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. This brings us to the massive paradox the author throws on the table.
Right.
Despite this absolute, unambiguous divine stamp of approval, the Zabur, all 150 Psalms, is virtually entirely omitted from sincere ibadah, the daily practice of worship.
It is entirely sidelined.
It is sidelined in scholarly focus. You don't see massive theological institutes dedicated to unpacking the Psalms in this tradition. So I have to pose the question to you, and I want everyone listening to genuinely think about this. Why?
It's the multi-million-dollar question.
Why would an institution take a text that their own holy book says was handed down by God and lock it in a vault of silence? I mean, worst off is Dawood, whose 150 Psalm Zabur is celebrated in name, but completely locked away.
That question is the pivot point of the entire article, and the author dismisses the easy answers.
Like what?
Well, the text suggests that the answer is not merely a matter of linguistic drift or a lack of literacy in ancient Hebrew or just a historical accident.
No, it's intentional.
The author proposes a much more intentional, controversial theory. The text suggests that the Zabur is ignored because the theology it contains is fundamentally incompatible with the strict, flattened definition of Tawhid.
It's not just a different flavor of religion. It's a completely different operating system. The Psalms break the drum beat and force the symphony back into the room.
Precisely. According to the author's analysis, the Zabur teaches a nature of God that shatters the concept of a singular, undifferentiated essence.
Oh, wow.
The text argues that the Psalms implicitly and explicitly reveal God's nature as existing in a plurality. Specifically, what later theology would term the three persons of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
That is a massive theological shift.
It gets bigger. Furthermore, the author asserts that the Zabur focuses heavily, almost obsessively, on a coming figure, Jesus, not merely as a subsequent human prophet in a long timeline, but as a divine entity occupying a dual role of eternal king and eternal priest.
Let's stop and look at the sociology of this for a moment. Think about the traditions you grew up with. How much of what you believe was curated for you by someone else centuries ago?
A lot for most people.
Right. If a religious institution acts as a gatekeeper, curating the texts available to its followers, it is quite literally curating their understanding of reality.
Yes.
If you have 150 chapters of divine poetry texts that deal with agonizing grief, the terrifying wrath of God, the desperate need for a savior, and the complex, multi-personal nature of the divine, and you remove that from the daily diet of the believer, what happens to them?
It creates a form of spiritual malnourishment, or at least a highly restricted spiritual diet.
Yeah.
By gatekeeping the complex texts, an institution enforces a simpler, more controllable religious experience. It prioritizes obedience, rote memorization, and basic morality over the messy, difficult, and profound theological grappling that the Psalms require.
You keep the population in the shallow end of the pool.
Yes. It is safe, it is manageable, and it reinforces the authority of the institution that tells you the deep end is unnecessary.
But the author of our source text refuses to stay in the shallow end. They are arguing that true freedom requires opening the vault. And to prove just how explosive the contents of that vault are, the text points us to one specific, highly concentrated excerpt, Zabur 110, Psalm 110.
If the 150 Psalms are the locked vault, Psalm 110 is the glowing, radioactive core hidden inside it.
Oh, I love that.
The source introduces Psalm 110 as a foundational shahada, a definitive testimony or witness about Nabi Yisrael, Prophet Jesus. Now, understanding the timeline is crucial to understanding the author's point here.
Let's lay out the timeline.
This song was written by Melech Daud, King David, approximately 1,000 years before Jesus was born. Yet, the text argues it speaks with terrifying specificity to events far in the future.
And the historical context the author provides for the usage of the psalm is wild.
It really is.
When Jesus died and rose from the dead, his followers had to explain to a highly skeptical ancient world what just happened. I mean, the very first public theological announcement of the resurrection, the moment Christianity effectively went public, relied entirely on invoking this exact psalm, Zabur 110.
They used David what?
Yes, Zabur 110 was the architectural blueprint they used to explain the most consequential event in their theology. They used it to show where David had recorded what God told him about Jesus. They used it because of the staggering claims the text actually makes. The source article meticulously breaks down Zabur 110 into three distinct, incredibly disruptive revelations about the identity and role of this coming figure.
Okay, let's break them down.
Let's analyze the first one, the revelation of the Mashiach, the Messiah, and the concept of the right hand.
So Psalm 110, verse 1, it reads, "The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool."
This raises an important question, which forces us to look at the mechanics of ancient royal courts. What does it actually mean to sit at the right hand of a sovereign?
Well, in antiquity, it wasn't just a VIP seat. The right hand was the seat of shared executive power. If you sat at the king's right hand, you wielded the king's authority. You spoke with his voice.
Exactly. Now apply that to the divine throne room. The source text poses a question that shatters the premise of strict Tawhid. How can anyone sit next to God?
Oh.
If God is entirely singular, entirely separate from creation, there is no next to. There is no shared authority.
Right, because if you put an angel there, or a really good prophet, you are instantly committing idolatry. You are elevating a created being to the status of the creator.
That is the inescapable logical trap. The author argues that no angel, no Nabi prophet, no Rasul messenger can ever occupy that seat. Only God himself possesses the infinite capacity to occupy the highest echelon of divine authority.
Okay, so then who is sitting there?
Well, therefore the author reasons, when David writes that the Lord Yahweh, God the Father, speaks to my Lord, the pre-incarnate Jesus, and commands him to sit next to him in a position of co-equal honor. It is a profound, undeniable revelation of plurality within the divine nature.
David is eavesdropping on a conversation between two persons of the Godhead 1,000 years before the incarnation. He is documenting God's self-revelation in more than one person.
According to the author's textual analysis, yes. It argues that this passage proves that while there is only one God, his nature is complex, and we must accept his self-revelation in a plural manner.
And when did this happen?
The text notes that this specific prophecy, the ascension to the right hand, was fulfilled through Jesus' death, his conquest over the grave, and his subsequent return to that position of divine authority.
So that is the first massive disruption. The Messiah possessing co-equal divine authority at the right hand.
Yes.
The second role the text extracts from this psalm is Mulk, which translates to rule or absolute dominion.
Moving to Psalm 110, verse 2. The Lord sends forth from Zion your mighty scepter. Rule in the midst of your enemies.
This one feels more straightforward, but its implications are no less massive for the narrative of who Jesus is. The text is asserting that Jesus is not just a wandering ascetic teacher.
Right.
He is not just a localized messenger giving moral advice to a small group of people in the first century. He is a divine king wielding a scepter, ruling over the entire cosmos. It shifts his identity from a historical footnote to the cosmic sovereign.
It elevates the scope of his authority from the temporal to the eternal. But it is the third role described in this psalm that is arguably the most complex, the most brilliant, and the most crucial piece of the author's entire argument.
Okay.
It is the role of the kahin, the priest.
Psalm 110, verse 4. Let's read it. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Okay, we need to do some serious historical excavation here for the listener. Because to a modern ear, or even someone casually familiar with biblical history, this sounds incredibly obscure. Who on earth is Melchizedek, and why does his order matter? Why is God swearing an oath, which implies massive, unchangeable significance about this specific guy's order in a hidden psalm?
It is the most intricate theological knot the author unties.
Walk us through it.
To comprehend the weight of Melchizedek, the source text directs us back even further than David. Back to the older Torah, the foundational Torah tradition, specifically Genesis chapter 14.
Okay, Genesis 14.
Melchizedek is an intensely mysterious figure who appears for a brief, flashing moment during the life of Abraham.
So this is centuries before Moses.
Centuries before Moses, centuries before the nation of Israel existed, long before the laws and the temple system were ever established.
He predates the entire machinery of the organized religion.
Entirely, and the text carefully unpacks the linguistic significance of his titles. The name Melchizedek translates literally to King of Righteousness. Furthermore, the text identifies him geographically as the Malik of Salam, the King of Peace Salam being an ancient name for Jerusalem.
Okay, a king.
But here is the critical anomaly. He is simultaneously described as the Kahin of Al-Allah, the priest of God Most High.
Wait, let me deduce what that actually means in this context.
Hmm.
I know enough about the history of the ancient Israelites to know that once Moses came along and laid down the law, the separation of powers was absolute.
Absolutely, absolute.
The priesthood was strictly genetically locked down to Moses' brother, Aaron, and the tribe of Levi.
Yeah.
You had to win the genetic lottery to be a priest. And later, the kingship was strictly locked down to the tribe of Judah, specifically the lineage of David. Under the established religious law, you could not cross the streams. You could not be a king and a priest at the same time. It was forbidden.
It was a capital offense in their legal code to usurp a role that did not belong to your lineage. The roles were divided specifically to prevent absolute power from corrupting a single human individual.
But Melchizedek was both. Before the law even existed, he held both titles flawlessly, King of Peace and Priest of the Most High.
Yes. And the author highlights an even more vital distinction. Melchizedek's priesthood was not hereditary. He didn't inherit the title because of who his father was, and he didn't pass it on to his son.
He's just there.
In the narrative, he appears without genealogy. He held an eternal, higher, inherent office appointed directly by God, independent of human genetics or institutional law.
So let's put the pieces together. When David, 1,000 years later, living squarely under the strict laws of the Levitical priesthood, suddenly writes a psalm prophesying that this future divine figure sitting at the right hand will be a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. He is essentially lighting a match and tossing it onto the established religious system.
Yes.
He is bypassing the entire Aaronic priesthood.
It is a revolutionary systemic bypass. David is announcing that the current system of animal sacrifices, mediated by flawed, mortal priests who die and have to be replaced, is temporary. It is merely a shadow.
A placeholder.
Exactly. The prophecy asserts that a new, eternal priesthood is coming that supersedes the hereditary lines. The author emphasizes that this specific Cain role, the eternal priest who offers a final, perfect sacrifice, is the crucial detail required to understand the full scope of God's redemptive plan.
It's missing piece.
The Injil, the New Testament text, specifically the book of Hebrews, heavily emphasizes this exact priestly role to explain how Jesus' death actually functioned to remove sin permanently.
It's like discovering the master blueprint that makes sense of a chaotic construction site. You look at ancient history and you see all these weird, seemingly disjointed elements.
Right.
You see the bizarre, brief appearance of a king priest named Melchizedek. You see the traumatic establishment of animal sacrifices with Adam and Moses. You read the emotionally volatile, confusingly plural prophecies of David. And then you see the sudden, violent execution of a carpenter named Jesus.
Without the psalm, they are just random, disconnected historical dots.
Exactly. But the moment you drop Abu 110 into the center of the timeline, the entire blueprint illuminates. You see the threefold revelation, the divine Messiah at the right hand, the universal king holding the scepter, the eternal priest offering the final sacrifice.
The source argues that Jesus is the absolute culmination of all those ancient bloody promises. He is the final sacrifice that permanently ends the need for the animal skins Adam was given.
And that precise realization brings us to the author's ultimate conclusion and call to action.
Yes. The text employs a specific, resonant Arabic term to describe this process. Sad Akthagrat, which translates to closing the gap.
So what does this all mean? I deeply appreciate the passion the author brings to this concluding thought. They write, the prophets did not have duct tape around their lips.
They weren't silenced in their own time.
Right, they didn't just walk through history like robots, monotonously repeating the word Tawhid over and over. They were alive. They taught the full, terrifying, and beautiful spectrum of reality. They confronted humanity with the inescapable guilt of sin, the absolute, unyielding necessity of a blood sacrifice to satisfy cosmic justice, and according to this text, they pointed explicitly and repeatedly to the identity of that final sacrifice, Jesus.
The author's directive is clear. They argue that by breaking the vault of silence, by consciously integrating the Zabur, the Psalms, back into sincere daily worship believers, the Mu'min, are finally equipped to honor God's instructions fully.
The gap is closed.
The historical gap is closed. The artificial separation between the ancient prophets and the final fulfillment is removed. The continuity of divine revelation is restored.
So what does this actually mean for you, the listener, right now? We've spent this time tracing an incredibly dense, multi-millennial theological argument. We've looked at the missing blood on the altars, the silenced poetry of the kings, the subversion of the eternal priesthood. How does the source text suggest we operationalize this knowledge today?
The author makes a very specific temporal connection that serves as a powerful concluding thought. They intentionally connect this theological breakdown directly to your upcoming celebrations of Eid and Nowruz.
Okay, how so?
The text highlights a profound inference. Eid is a joyous occasion, a time of communal celebration. But the author argues it is fundamentally misunderstood if it is merely used for parading personal piety or showing off our newly sown fig leaves, to return to that earlier metaphor.
Right. It's not a fashion show of morality. It's not about how good we can make ourselves look to our neighbors or to a distant god.
Precisely. The text argues that true celebration requires paying absolute, undivided attention to God and his priorities, exactly as he communicated them through the unfiltered voices of his prophets. It is an invitation to celebrate the profound, terrifying freedom that comes from confronting actual truth rather than settling for a curated, flattened summary.
It's like taking off a pair of incredibly dark sunglasses you didn't even realize you'd been wearing your entire life. Suddenly, the glaring light of the full Sach, the complete, unapologetic voice of the Nabiyun, is visible and audible.
Everything comes into focus.
The contact names in that directory we talked about at the beginning, we finally have their phone numbers attached. The lines are open. You can actually hear the symphony they were composing. Can you imagine why anyone might possibly want to hide this information?
Well, because it undeniably requires a degree of intellectual and spiritual courage to pry open a vault that has been intentionally sealed by centuries of tradition. It is the ultimate manifestation of the freedom of knowledge. Recognizing these omitted voices, acknowledging the vault of silence, absolutely challenges the status quo.
It's uncomfortable.
It demands a rigorous, sometimes painful reevaluation of inherited traditions. It forces you to ask hard questions of the gatekeepers. But the text passionately argues that this disruption invites a vastly richer, infinitely more complex, and ultimately more liberating understanding of divine guidance. You move from the shallow end into the deep waters of genuine theological reality.
And that ultimately is the entire mission of our deep dive today, which perfectly mirrors the text's own intent. We wanted to give you the tools to look at these massive claims, to see the hidden architecture of the arguments, and to experience the sheer freedom that comes when knowledge is ungated. You do not have to blindly accept a flattened drumbeat narrative if the original ancient texts are offering you a masterpiece symphony.
The treasure buried inside is more than worth the societal disruption it might cause.
Which leaves us with one final, incredibly provocative thought. A thought I want you to carry with you, to mull over long after this deep dive ends. We just spent this entire time unpacking the monumental, world-altering implications of a single ancient poem, Zabur 110.
Just one psalm.
Right. We look at how those few dense verses redefine cosmic kingship, the eternal priesthood, and the very plural nature of the divine. But the source text explicitly reminds us of a staggering, almost overwhelming fact. There are 149 more psalms in the Zabur.
It is a vast, largely untouched reservoir of divine revelation waiting in the dark.
Exactly. Think about that math. If one single chapter holds this much hidden architecture about the mechanics of atonement, the eternal priesthood, and the identity of the Messiah, what profound reality-shifting revelations might be sitting quietly in the other 149 chapters? What other prophecies, what other terrifying truths or beautiful comforts are just waiting in that vault of silence for you to finally read them?
It is a question that doesn't just ask for an answer. It invites a lifetime of exploration.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring the primary sources. Keep asking the hard, disruptive questions. Do not settle for the fig leaves. And most importantly, celebrate and enjoy the absolute freedom of knowledge this Eid and Nowruz. Until next time.